This video is powered by the pros at Pascal Air Plumbing and Electric. Arkansas owned, Arkansas operated. GoPascal.com.
Pat, for the last few months, it really felt like the 9-game schedule was inevitable, and now it seems like the 8-game has picked up some traction. What can you tell us, being in Birmingham, the conversations behind the scenes between athletic directors and presidents that has kind of caused some back and forth heading into this week?
Good morning, guys. Always appreciate coming on with y'all. It's going to be a very, very busy week down in Destin. Basically, the things that we kept hearing leading up until this week was that Alabama, Nick Saban, gave a famous interview to Sports Illustrated a couple months ago because he kind of leaked out the fact that Alabama, their 3 permanent opponents, was going to be LSU, Tennessee, and Auburn. And then Nick Saban then went on and on about how that just did not seem like that was a fair situation for his Alabama Crimson Tide. And I'm not saying that that swayed anybody, but Alabama had been in the forefront always wanting those 9 games. But then when Nick Saban starts raising the question about your 3 permanent opponents, Alabama then slid to the category and not really sure exactly where they are. And you already had the Kentuckys, the Mississippi States, Ole Miss, and Vanderbilts. They were already against going to 9 games. And then when you've got the upheaval at ESPN and the budget concerns that they currently have, ESPN just not in the mood right now to pay extra money that they technically don't have to with this contract in regards to another conference game. So I think that's where everybody's kind of hitting pause this week. And Greg Sankey definitely made his feelings known yesterday, if you read between the lines, that he wants to go to the 9 games. So we'll see what happens this week, but it's going to be very political down there in regards to which side the factions are going to line up on.
And you just brought up an excellent point about what's going on with Disney and ESPN and the budget cuts and them having to lay people off. And I know McAfee just got that job, and I know that, again, this is something that the SEC is pushing. But if you're ESPN, if you're Bob Iger, if you're Jimmy Pitaro, and you're all the bigwigs over there, is there room? Is there enough of a return on your investment to go straight to 9 games with everything going on right now?
Probably not, and I think that's why right now there's the frustration in Destin, because I will tell you, 1 year ago, ESPN, Jimmy Pitaro, all those guys, they were in Destin. I mean, they were making the pitch last year. They laid the groundwork last year at these meetings about how important it was for the SEC to go to 1 additional game. And, of course, at that time, I think the company, ESPN, Disney, they were in a better financial shape. They were looking down the road, the potential additions to Texas and Oklahoma, how much more that could mean. But you also need to keep in mind from an ESPN point of view, they've got a contract with the SEC. It's very favorable, a lot of money going to the side of the SEC. But they're also a partner, 50-50 in the SEC network. And so ESPN's point of view is, okay, guys, if you have that 1 additional game that we shouldn't pay for because you guys are a partner with us in the SEC network, more network games means additional revenue. Advertising is going to be, through the wall, just like it was in 2020 when you played 10 conference games. So from the ESPN business side, they're like going, why do we need to go ahead and pay more for this? It's almost like what CBS did for all those years, guys, because you remember that was the biggest deal in all of sports. I mean, what CBS paid for the SEC package and what they didn't pay for the SEC championship game every year, which was about $3 million. So ESPN's not ready just yet. A lot can happen this week in negotiations. As y'all know, things can change. But as of right now, the definite tea leaves that I'm hearing from the people on the ground and the people that I trust around the SEC, they're telling me that right now it seems like ESPN is not willing to pay a dime more until 2025.
I'll be interested, Pat, to see where the dividing lines and maybe the schools like Arkansas or the size of Arkansas with their budgets, do they put more value on that extra home game in an 8-game schedule, knowing that, hey, yeah, we may have to play an away game for a non-conference once every 3 years or whatever you can work out, but 4 SEC games at home, likely 4 non-conference games more years than not. I mean, that's a big deal for your donors. It's a huge revenue boost for your season ticket sales. I'll be interested to see where the dividing lines are. What do you think about who values that extra home game more than guaranteed TV money?
Well, it's interesting because when you started laying the groundwork and you start talking to people around the different schools, going into this week, the 9-game camp, I was told, Florida, LSU, Mizzou, and Texas A&M. I know it's strange to think that Mizzou wants to have an extra conference game based on the fact that they haven't had the kind of success that they would like to have in football. But I was told those 4 teams are definitely in the 9-game camp. Now, you mentioned Arkansas. Arkansas is like Auburn. The people that I've heard around the conference is that they've been holding their cards very close to their vest. So, I mean, you guys would be a better barometer than I would about what Arkansas currently feels. But the general feeling around the league is that Arkansas and Auburn, South Carolina, and Tennessee, they're very close to either side. I mean, they could be swayed either way. And, of course, as we know how voting goes in this conference, when they do, the presidents would vote on this on Friday. When they do vote, it's a simple majority. So it would basically take, obviously, 8 schools to say, yes, let's go to 9, or, 8 schools to say, no, let's stay at 8. So, but the number that I keep hearing on that additional game, or the monies that ESPN would have to pay for that 9th conference game, would average around $5 million per school. So then at that point in time, it's okay, by you getting rid of that home game, as you just discussed, is that going to be enough, that $5 million that's going to come back to you via ESPN if they go to 9 games once ESPN finally pays for that additional game? That's something that every school is going to have to decide. And then at that point in time, which schedule model are you going to go with in regards to your permanent opponents?
See, I'm of the belief, the presidents and chancellors will make the final vote, but they're going to follow the cue nearly every time of their AD, right? And then
sure, absolutely.
The AD, if he's got a football coach he really likes, and the hardest job of any AD is to find a good football coach, they're probably going to take their cue from their football coach. And I think when you think about where the coaches, and you talked about Nick Saban, who's been a proponent, and others that have been for the 9 games, there's going to be coaches that understand, hey, I'm in a spot where if I can win 7 or 8 games, I'm on safe ground for a while. Playing 8 home games or 7 or 8 home games every year keeps me in that safer ground. I think when you really get down to it, they may not say it publicly, but coaches like those $5+ million a year paychecks. And playing at home secures those long term. And don't undervalue, from my seat at least, the football coach's influence. I think the heaviest hand in this will be, the 14 and presumably, the upcoming 16 head football coaches in this league.
There's no doubt. And it's also interesting because, Oklahoma and Texas, they're in Destin. They'll be able to sit in the meetings. They're not a voting member until next July 1st, but they're there. Both of those schools have made it perfectly clear to the SEC they want 9 games. Because if they don't get the 9 games, then all of a sudden you've got all sorts of scheduling quagmire going on, because Texas and Oklahoma, by them coming into the league, it was understood, if we're coming to the SEC, the Red River rivalry game is going to be played every year. Like, that's not going to be on the cutting edge floor. Well, if they go to a different schedule model moving forward, you might not get Texas A&M and Texas every year. And that would be a travesty to the game, just like if you don't get Auburn and Georgia every year, the South's oldest rivalry, that would be a travesty. So there's a lot of things going on down there, and the political backlash is going to be interesting because, as you just mentioned, and the coaches are going to drive this. They're going to give the direction that the ADs need to go in, and then the presidents basically are going to look to the ADs and say, okay, where are we going here? And then they're going to vote from there.
Yeah, you just walked right into to what I've been most upset about. I understand there's not an appetite any longer because of competitive balance to have divisions, and I don't fully understand that because I don't think the SEC is really ever going to be in a place where someone could win a division and be the 5th best team or the 4th best team in this league. But that is the thing. I mean, Oklahoma and Texas joining this league, for an Arkansas fan, I want to play OU. I want to play Texas. I want to play Texas A&M every year. Make the case why we should just so quickly scrap, and it's not even an option on the table right now, a division model that keeps intact all of these great traditions and rivalries and the games the fans want.
Yeah, and that's the thing, because and Greg Sankey's telegraphed it numerous times throughout the spring. I mean, he's been very frustrated because it seemed at one time everybody was in favor of this 9-game model. At that point in time, I think that's why you had it leak out about your 3 permanent opponents, because that was kind of a test to see who's going to be the most upset or who's going to be behind that policy. But, the fans are the ones that want to have these rivalry games. I mean, you got a situation where within the last 15 to 20 years, Alabama-LSU has been one of the biggest rivalries in this conference. There was so much decided in the SEC West every year based on that game in November. Well, based on these other models that you've been seeing, there's the potential that that game would not be played except every other year or every 2 years, and that's a travesty. And it's just like I brought up the Auburn-Georgia game. There's no reason why those two teams shouldn't be playing every single year, but because of the way this conference is going to have to do things, there are going to be some of these rivalries that's going to be on the cutting-edge floor. And like you said, Arkansas should be playing those former members of the Southwest Conference or the old Big Eight, whatever. That's who they need to be playing. But for whatever reason, I know you guys know it as well as anybody, it's all about that money. And if you can't get that guarantee $5 million more per school, then they're just going to punt and they're just going to kick the can down the road. And they're going to say, well, okay, let's just stay with the 8. And as of next year, I mean, I am hearing that as a stopgap, if they can't get these 8 votes for the 9 games, next year you're looking at a format of 1-7 where you will play one rivalry game and then you will have other opponents that will be on some form of rotation. And I think Arkansas and Missouri would be the game that you guys would care the most about, whereas in my neck of the woods, it's Alabama and Auburn, but there's no Alabama-Tennessee, and there's no guarantee that there's an Alabama-LSU. So a lot of things need to be decided over the next 4 days.
Pat Smith's with us this morning, does radio in Birmingham, Alabama. Pat, one of the items that's kind of taking a back seat, at least from the listener's perspective, is the storming of the field fines. Have you got any word on what they're going to follow through or not follow through relative to the upping of fines this week?
Well, that is one of the major topics of discussion that I know that's dear to Greg Sankey. Along with the field storming, I think the gambling issue is going to be something that obviously those of us in the state of Alabama that cover Alabama baseball, that's something that obviously some things are going to need to be addressed there. But from a field storming standpoint, I have been consistent from day one. Unless you're playing in a national championship game, I am vehemently opposed to anybody being on the field, period. That has no business. I know fans are excited. But, what the SEC was doing, the $100,000, the $250,000, $500,000, when you have the president of Tennessee coming out last year basically saying, hey, we'll do this every week. I mean, this is great. This is fantastic. Meanwhile, you got players getting into it with fans and drunk fans, getting in the faces of the players that just lost a tough game. I mean, it's a bad situation for everyone. I think the SEC wants to lay the gauntlet down. I think the SEC is going to try to propose something, and it could be you losing a home game. I mean, it could be something that is so outrageous to people, but it's going to be a deterrent because right now the money situation, like I said, when you have a leader of your university saying, we will do this every week and write a check every week, this is fantastic for my students to be on the field or fans to be on the field, then there is no deterrent. They don't care. So I think the SEC will look at the field storming, and I think there's going to be some, I guess, to the average fan, some crazy proposals. But this is where we are now. I mean, the safety of the student athlete is the most important thing right now.
Pat, you brought up Alabama baseball. The Crimson Tide are one of 8 SEC teams hosting in a regional. This is the record right now for teams hosting. Tide's the record for number of teams that made it with 10. Are you surprised the selection committee actually did it this way, with a lot of people thinking, they won't do it because it's too regional?
No, I don't. Being in Hoover all last week and being at the tournament, and by the way, as you guys know, I mean, it was record crowd. It was the student attendance record for SEC baseball. Over 171,000, over 10,000 fans per game came out to the Hoover Mat. We had bad weather on Tuesday, but the rest of the week it was Chamber of Commerce. It was absolutely gorgeous. This is the best baseball conference in the country. I know we say that all the time about football, but it is hands down. Even going into last week in Hoover, whether it was D1 baseball or Baseball America, everybody basically had the same thing in regards to who the top 4 potentially was going to be coming out of the conference. They were hoping to get 7, then they end up getting 8, and then you get the number of teams that actually get the invite. So, no, not shocked at all, especially in my state. Auburn and Alabama both, the last few weeks of the season, they really came on strong. really didn't have to do a lot of work in Hoover to get their, regional hosting situation handled. But no, it just goes to show you, Ty, that this conference, and you guys know it because you guys are more baseball driven on that side of the conference than we are in this state. And it's just great to see that this conference is getting its due.
So what's the future with Alabama baseball? Bohannon being released after the gambling situation. What are fans thinking? What are they saying? Or are they just worried about Nick Saban's next recruiting class?
Well, it's definitely going to be the latter. Okay, it's always going to be what's going on with Nick Saban. There were more conversations about Nick Saban being in Italy and being recognized a couple weeks ago because as opposed to leading up to the SEC baseball tournament. This is just the way we are in this state when you follow somebody like him. The Alabama baseball team, before the controversy erupted with the gambling situation, this was a good baseball team. And for all the sins that Brad Bohannon did as a leader of young men and doing what he is alleged to have done in regards to gambling, or at least giving information to someone that placed a wager on it, he did a really nice job recruiting these players. And it was just nice to know that these players were not wrapped up in whatever things he was involved with. And this team's been focused. And for them to be able to get a region, that's huge, something that had not been done since 2010 in Tuscaloosa. This is a good baseball team. And so it's good to see that the players have reacted the way they have in a positive nature. And as you guys know, you get into regional, anything can happen. So, they feel like if they can make a good run this week in Tuscaloosa, then they'll be, I believe, in the Wake Forest region, which is kind of tough in a super regional if Wake Forest wins. So, but going back to your original question, it's always, until the day that Nick Saban decides not to coach anymore, it's always going to be Nick Saban.
BetOnline.ag is your number one source for all your basketball info, stats, news, and scores. Get the latest odds and lines, including the latest player reports for this year's pro basketball playoffs. BetOnline is always your sports information headquarters this season, as we have you covered for all your sports wagering needs. Basketball, MLB, NHL hockey, right down to UFC and boxing. BetOnline is the fastest and easiest way for you to get your betting info, including live betting options and your favorite casino and card games you can play right from your home. Head to the website today or use your mobile device to get in on the action. Be sure to use our promo code BELIEVE to receive your 50% welcome bonus on your first deposit. That's BLEAV. BLEAV. BetOnline, where the game starts.